From the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. I'm your host, John Letts, and this is episode 112. As in all of our episodes, we're helping English language learners at the intermediate level improve their level of English proficiency. And we do this through a content-based approach, and our thematic component to that is our study of Native Americans, a social studies unit. Now, when you think of Native Americans, you might think of Indian reservations. Well, that is what we're all about this week. We have a video that features the movement of Western Indians onto reservations. Let's watch.
The drums and the voices of the people once rang out throughout the Great Plains and the mountains of the West. Then a new voice was increasingly heard. Outsiders on the move, white people moving west.
Grab the wheels, we turn them around. One long pull and we're on hard ground. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me ridey-o, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. On the 14th day of October, oh, I hitched my team in order, oh, to ride the hills and take the trail. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me ridey-o, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o. To me ridey-o, to me ridey-o. To me roll, to me roll, to me ridey-o.
Treaties were signed to keep these trails open and to protect Native Americans from Euro-American encroachment. These protected areas were called reservations. For the United States, this was not a new concept. Britain had set aside land west of the Allegheny and Smoky Mountains as Indian country. None of these vast areas were designed to persist. The sheer number of white people moving onto Western lands proved unstoppable. When Henry Hudson's ship was frozen into Hudson's Bay during the winter, his crew survived only because of help from the Cree Indians who lived along the shore. While Henry Hudson and his son were lost to mutiny, the contact between the captain and the indigenous Cree set in motion an expansive fur-trading empire for England. The Hudson Bay Company linked England with the vast territory of the Cree Indians. Cree men hunted beaver. Their women laboriously processed the furs for shipping to European markets. Traders from England, Scotland, and Ireland married into Cree families, forming a linguistic and cultural bridge. They led brigades of porters carrying much-desired goods from Europe to their Cree kinspeople. They hunted beaver and kept the flow of trade goods and furs going between themselves and Rupert's Land. Cree warriors protected this trade from any people from the West. As their population plummeted due to European diseases, so did their power. They began making treaties with the government and losing territory to Indian reserves. Indigenous American nations participating in the fur trade carefully shut out rival nations to the west. One of those was the Iron Confederacy. The tribes of the Blackfoot organized their own confederacy. The Piegan, the Kainai, also known as the Bloods, and the Sarcee, and other bison hunters and trout fishermen ranged across the northern plains and far beyond. They traded with the Cree for horses and firearms, which allowed them to expand their territory, replacing the eastern Shoshone and other neighbors in Montana and parts of Alberta. The Blackfoot had a special relation with fire.
Fire is, very important to us. It was very important to us in many areas. One of the most important areas was conservation. Piikani people were very, very conscious of making sure that when they left the area, that it was clean and that it was going to come back just the way they found it. So when they left camp, they would burn the area so that the things they left there was all burned. Everything was burned, the whole grounds and all. And what that did was it left it to renew, and it would grow back and renew. The fire was very important. And another aspect was that was how they built their pharmacies. After a fire, the first thing that comes up is the weeds. Many of them are the medicines that we use for various ailments and the things that we need. We will make a fire, deliberately burn an area where we know that certain plants are. It'll burn them down and then they'll grow back.
The Blackfoot hunted in small dispersed bands, but assembled as a nation for rituals such as the sun dance at the time of the gathering of chokeberries. This gathering strengthened bonds among bands and facilitated healing. Sage and sweetgrass were used in purification ceremonies. The Blackfoot became known as the Lords of the Prairie at the peak of their power. After pushing the Shoshone and the Arapaho out of the region, the Blackfoot began direct trade with the Hudson's Bay Company. Entering the fur trade made them enemies of the Cree, and hence the Iron Confederacy. They also went to war against the Nez Perce, the Kootenai, the Flathead, and the Crow. The Cheyenne and the Dakota were also enemies of the Blackfoot. This painting is entitled When Blackfoot and Sioux Meet. The Blackfoot entered successful trade with the American Fur Company. Forts were set up to trade. This contact resulted in outbreaks of cholera and smallpox, killing over 6,000 Blackfoot, which spelled the end of their dominance of the northern plains. The U.S. Army attacked a friendly band of Blackfoot by mistake in 1870, resulting in the Marias Massacre. Most of the victims were women and children, as the men had been away on hunting expeditions when the massacre occurred. Further south, Blackfoot Chief Mountain Chief carried out hostilities against settlers and the U.S. Army, and by then the bison herds had almost vanished, leaving desperate, hungry Blackfoot warriors to attack. Blackfoot neutrality did not spare them from being confined to reserves in Canada and reservations in the United States. Most of the Blackfoot Confederacy tribes moved to or stayed in Canada after their reservation in Montana was reduced in size without their consultation. The Fort Laramie Treaty Council of 1851 was an incredible gathering of tens of thousands of Native Americans from Northern Plains tribes. Tribes that had been bitter enemies for decades exchanged gifts, shared stories, smoked pipes together, and even exchanged children. Native American communities decimated by diseases and warfare sought peaceful ways to rebuild. In many, if not most, treaty councils, Native Americans far outnumbered the government agents and army personnel. Typically, gifts were distributed and speeches were given. Great oratory by Native American leaders was heard. Food was consumed and often distributed along with trade goods. Large gatherings were nothing new to Native Americans for trading events and when bands and clans gathered for days of ceremony. Treaty councils sometimes took the feel of such gatherings. Many grievances and ill wills were worked out in such gatherings, and intertribal connections made. In an effort to make the Oregon Trail safe for immigrants and to minimize violence between Native American groups, the treaty provided well-marked and vast territories for signers of the treaty. Signatories of the 1851 treaty agreed to respect these territories. However, the Sioux encroached on territory of the Crow soon after the treaty was signed. The Peace Commission held many treaty councils beginning in 1868, but by 1871, Congress ended the treaty-making era. The New Deal became this: move to the reservation or face the wrath of the U.S. Army. In the 1850s, a Crow boy had a vision. After relating that vision to tribal elders, a future path became clear to the Crow tribe. The presence of white people would become larger, soon dominating the northern plains. The Crow carried on major trade with the United States. If the Crow were to continue in their country, they would need to ally themselves with the white people in the struggle against their worst enemies, the Cheyenne-Sioux-Arapaho alliance that was in bitter conflict with the United States. Along with those groups, the Crow were surrounded by the Iron Confederacy and the Blackfoot Confederacy. There were constant hostilities and violent conflicts. That boy with the vision matured to become a Crow chief known as Plenty Coups. As his boyhood vision came to guide the Crow in their orientation, Plenty Coups himself guided his nation during these most dangerous times. Crow warriors were essential to the survival of the Crow Nation. They were the only force resisting the intrusion of Sioux, Cheyenne, and other enemies. In the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, the Crow's territory was mapped in a region of the Powder River, but the Sioux soon encroached on that area, and the less numerous Crow were pushed out. In the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, the Sioux succeeded in gaining U.S. recognition of territory taken from the Crow as unceded Indian territory of the Sioux. The Crow were pressured to accept a smaller reservation on the Yellowstone River. This was followed by numerous attacks by Sioux and Cheyenne that killed hundreds of Crow Indians. The peaceful relations with the United States did not waver by the Crows. When the Army began building forts along the Bozeman Trail, Crow warriors helped the garrisons as they built the forts. Many Crow enlisted in the U.S. Army as scouts in campaigns against the Sioux. The military action occurred in former Crow territory, so the Crow scouts were invaluable sources of information to the U.S. Army. Crow scouts served the U.S. Army during the Great Sioux War, joining Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. In 1878, 700 Crow teepees were erected where the Bighorn River and Yellowstone River meet. They joined General Nelson Miles in celebrating the victory over the Sioux. For their service to the U.S. Army, the Crow were allotted a reservation within their own territory.
Hey, 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 oh, well, hey,
The failure of the United States to keep white miners and settlers from land reserved for Indians, and the massacres of women and children, inflamed the Great Plains. Wagon trains, ranches, and towns were attacked by Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota Sioux warriors. Workers building the Transcontinental Railroad suffered attacks by Sioux followers of Chief Red Cloud. The U.S. Army began building forts along the Bozeman Trail after a failed peace conference at which Red Cloud and his followers stormed out, accusing the commissioners of deceit. In 1866, a party returning to one of those forts with timber from nearby hills was attacked by a small Sioux war party. Captain William J. Fetterman was sent to relieve the timber train and run off the warriors. Fetterman disobeyed orders not to pursue the warriors over a ridge, and he was met by over 2,000 Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux warriors. The captain and his command were killed to the last man, having been lured into a trap by a warrior named Crazy Horse. 2 years later, a treaty conference was called at Fort Laramie. The Peace Commission agreed to abandon the Bozeman Trail and the 3 forts constructed there. The United States agreed to establish a large reserve and to close the Powder River country to all whites. Red Cloud sent a messenger declaring that when the soldiers left and the forts were abandoned, only then would he come and sign the treaty. The soldiers retreated, and Red Cloud burned down the abandoned forts. He signed the treaty and retired to a reservation. The Fetterman massacre sent shockwaves through the Army. Now commanded by General William Tecumseh Sherman, the Army demanded revenge. Sherman advocated extermination, even of Indian women and children. Red Cloud's victory energized resistance to the United States' control of their homelands. The belief in the Army's invincibility was now questioned. Red Cloud gained support from Indians throughout the Northern Plains, and Crazy Horse earned respect and admiration among indigenous people throughout the region. Red Cloud no longer led warriors into battle, but he continued advocating for the Sioux and their allies by applying diplomacy during his visits to Washington, D.C. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 included the Black Hills in the Great Sioux Reservation. Offers to the Sioux to buy the Black Hills were angrily refused. By now, bands of Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho were camping together outside of the reservation for mutual protection. Chief Sitting Bull was a spiritual leader to the group, and he inspired them to fight with the Army at Rosebud. The U.S. Army had orders to force all Indians to return to and stay on reservations. 3 columns converged in an area called the Bighorn. That's where the mixed tribe was believed to be camped. General Crook's column set out from Fort Fetterman to meet up with the others. Crook encountered hostiles at Rosebud and fought an unsubstantial battle there with Sitting Bull's warriors. Crook was determined not to let Sitting Bull get away. He charged Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer with finding Sitting Bull's camp. From the site of that battle, the Army sent Custer with 700 troops to follow a fresh trail that led north toward the Bighorn River. Custer's orders were to find the village and then await reinforcements and supplies. With 40 Arikara and 6 Crow scouts, Custer followed the trail. The scouts spotted signs of a large village. The Crow scouts knew their Sioux enemy well and advised Custer to await reinforcements. They had never seen a Sioux encampment so large. A mixed descent interpreter told the scouts, "Curly, White Swan, Half Yellowface, White Man Runs Him, Goes Ahead, and Hairy Moccasin, their job was finished by finding the Sioux, and that they should leave. Leave now," he told them. The Crow scouts had been right. The camp stretched 3 miles along the Little Bighorn River, with a population of up to 10,000 people. As the U.S. Army approached, Sitting Bull called out, "Warriors, we have everything to fight for." Custer expected that the Indians would run, but warriors confronted the soldiers with deadly fury, giving their women and children and elders time to escape. When Custer's unit appeared, the warriors focused their attack there. Some of the action was led by Crazy Horse. Custer's soldiers fled to the center of their own lines as more and more fell. In very little time, all the army soldiers were dead, including Custer. Sitting Bull led his victorious followers away, crossing the border into Canada and camping there. The defeat of Custer energized the followers of Sitting Bull, but both sides knew that this was not the end of troubles. Chief Bigfoot, also known as Spotted Elk, led some 350 mini Kanju Sioux and about 40 Hunkpapa Sioux in search of American soldiers. The bitter cold winter had brought this band of warriors, women, and children to the edge of survival. Terrible events had moved them to leave the Pine Ridge Reservation so they could perform the ghost dance without interference from reservation officials. Discouraged and miserable, Bigfoot led his followers toward the Pine Ridge Reservation. Bigfoot was suffering pneumonia, and the others were cold and hungry. When they encountered U.S. soldiers, they surrendered. Bigfoot was no stranger to U.S. officials. He had a long history of seeking peace and trying to make reservation life work for his people. The soldiers led them to their camp on Wounded Knee Creek, arriving in the dark. Bigfoot was provided an army tent with a small stove, and his followers were provided food and shelter. This may have peacefully ended the violence between the army and the Sioux, but the order was given to disarm the Indians, who awoke to find themselves in a large military camp surrounded by 500 soldiers. Those soldiers had quick-firing Hotchkiss guns. The Sioux men were told to assemble outside Bigfoot's tent and were told to surrender their weapons. The Sioux men hesitated. Bigfoot refused to tell them to give up their guns. A scuffle ensued, and a gun went off as soldiers tried to take it away by force. Several Sioux men produced their rifles from under their blankets and began shooting soldiers. The soldiers sprayed the area with rifle fire and explosive shells. Tents housing Sioux families were ripped to shreds and caught fire from the Hotchkiss shells. It was all over by noon. The soldiers returned to their fort ahead of the blizzard. 3 days later, soldiers returned to supervise burial of the dead. Among them was Bigfoot, one of the first to die. They buried 84 men and boys, 44 women, and 18 children. Some found the distance from the camp, indicating they were killed while fleeing. 25 soldiers were killed and an equal number wounded. 51 Sioux were wounded, mostly women and children, and transported to Pine Ridge Reservation, where some died of their wounds. Soldiers were awarded medals for their actions. Wounded Knee left a wound in the hearts of all Native Americans,
a wound that remains unhealed. Establishing and then shrinking reservations were the dominant actions of the U.S. government's policy for allowing Western expansion. Tribes agreed to respect each other's reservations, but these agreements were often broken as bison became harder to hunt. They were broken in other ways. With the bison largely exterminated, Native Americans exchanged land for food and other supplies. The system of distributing those goods was riddled with corruption. Communities were provided rotten meat and other poor food, resulting in starvation. While some Indian agents were honest and dedicated servants, many held their position by loyalty to an individual rather than to their country. They became wealthy while reservation communities starved, leading to hostilities and violence. Reservation life was often degrading. Reservations were often established on land unsuited for raising crops, even as reservation Indians were required to become farmers. Reservations were mostly isolated, cutting residents off from economic activity. The result was often depression and suicide. Then policy changed. Instead of collective ownership of reservations, Native Americans were forced to accept allotments. These small-scale acreage parcels were usually clustered together. Areas in the reservation that were not allotted were sold to white people as surplus land. Under the Indian New Deal, the U.S. government invested in infrastructure, health care, and education on the reservations. Likewise, over 2 million acres of land were returned to various tribes. In contrast, the termination policy took away reservations from the Coushatta, Ute, Menominee, Paiute, and Klamath Indians. While many Native Americans continue to live on reservations, indigenous Americans can be found in all regions of North America and even the world. Quality of life varies greatly from reservation to reservation. Nonetheless, health problems seem to haunt Native Americans living on reservations. While no Native Americans are required to stay on their reservation, many feel trapped there, and living conditions are often very difficult. Poverty and violence are the sad legacy of U.S. policy for many still living on the res. And with that, we close episode 112 of Ramping Up Your English. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next time. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RBTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.